Hello and welcome to Devil's Advocate. As India teeters on the brink of a midterm election with the nuclear deal in jeopardy, what impact could that have on India's economy and on its investment climate? That's an issue I should explore today in the first part of a two-part series with the doyen of Indian industry, the chairman of Tata Sons, Ratan Tata. Mr. Tata, as chairman of Tata Sons, do you welcome the prospect of a midterm election, or do you fear its consequences for both growth and the investment climate?
I think there's no question. I fear the uncertainty in the political environment, which will certainly cause India to stumble, will cause the momentum of growth that we've enjoyed to pause, if not reverse. And, you know, I for one, and I'm not a person of political leaning, I for one have been extremely encouraged by what has happened in India. It started in the last regime and continued under the Congress rule of India moving forward economically and becoming an economic powerhouse.
And that could start unraveling with a midterm election?
I believe it could if there were a midterm election, and I hope there is not.
What would happen to our target of 10% growth? Would a midterm election make it possibly unattainable?
I wouldn't want to comment because a midterm election could come in several ways. So I wouldn't want to comment on that, but certainly it would make things difficult.
And if at the same time the nuclear deal were to unravel, what impact would that have both on FDI inflows into the country and the perception of India as a destination for investment?
I can express my own personal views on this, both wearing the hat of the Investment Commission and my own personal views. It is my personal view that the civil nuclear deal with the United States is in many ways the best possible thing that has happened to India in a long while. Apart from the fact that it enables India to go ahead on a much larger scale in a much needed area of power, and in nuclear power, which is clean power, and get nuclear fuel. It also, which most people have not understood, it takes away many of the dual-use sanctions which have hurt India's technological access. And it enables India to once again access high technology, which over time will give India a tremendously powerful position in the knowledge industry, in R&D, and in high technology. I believe that the benefits that this civil nuclear deal will bring to the country will be enormous, and I'm very, very sorry that on various issues this is being beleaguered.
So if it doesn't materialize, this is a serious loss and setback for India?
I believe it is a serious setback to India. I think the only people who would be happy to see this not happen probably would be Pakistan and China.
And could it also have an impact on FDI inflows? After all, many Americans judge India as their government judges India. Might some of those thinking of investing now rethink and perhaps not come?
I think it could, because I think there'd be repercussions and there would be reactions. But I really do believe that if it did not happen, the only people who could be happy and benefited by this deal not happening would be the people of Pakistan and would be the people of China.
So those who are not our friends would benefit if the deal doesn't happen. India would lose.
You might say that, yes.
In May, speaking at the Confederation of Indian Industry, you said, and I'm quoting, "We're not doing enough to reach this landmark of 10% growth. India is not thinking big enough, not taking bold enough steps." What are the steps that you wanted the government to take which haven't been taken?
I think what I've said has also been said by the Prime Minister. If you look at China and India, one glaring difference that you see is that everything that China has done has been enormously bold, in fact, unbelievably bold, on the verge of seeming to be an overkill. And yet, they grow into that growth, they grow into that capacity. And that led me to believe that we're always growing in small increments, and we're always behind the curve because our demand exceeds supply, and it continues to be that way, and we're always trying to catch up. And perhaps the time has come now with India growing the way it is, and we're in a sustainable growth path, to go ahead of that curve and think really bold and build our airports for the next 15 years, to build our ports for the next 15 or 20 years, not for the next 5 years, or have them, behind the curve before they're finished.
You make it sound as if the problem actually lies in ourselves. Do we lack the confidence to be bold? Do we lack the vision? Or do we lack somehow the courage?
No, I think it's part of our culture. We've come from a planned economy. The planned economy was supposed to balance supply and demand. And we conserved resources so that we just did what we had to do. And if there were slippages in what we did, then we were behind where we should have been. So I think it's a culture of the past.
And a mindset conditioned by the planned economy, and we haven't been able to break out of that mindset.
That's right.
So we have to first of all teach ourselves how to be bold before we can be bold. We have to in fact change our way of thinking, in a sense.
Yes, and we have to have the courage to be able to live through that period of time where we may have oversupply. Because the planned economy and the license Raj has created another mindset, that you don't live in an open competitive world. You live in a world which buffers and protects you.
And we need to learn to live in competition.
That's
learn
right.
to not just live with competition, but learn to compete competitively.
And to be able to win in a competitive scenario.
The urge to win is something that Indians often haven't shown. You're saying we need to learn how to acquire that urge and compete.
The Indian is very entrepreneurial. As a nation, we're full of people who are entrepreneurial, who have a spirit of winning. And somehow in the private sector, we are afraid to do that. We're afraid of competition. We're afraid of foreign competition. We often do not want to see this take place. And yet, if I take the automobile industry, for example, we have everybody internationally in India. And Indian car makers are still surviving.
So conquer fear is the first thing. That's what we have to do.
Conquer fear and have an urge to win.
Now, just a few days before your speaking at the Confederation of Indian Industry, which I quoted you, you also wrote a letter to the Prime Minister in your capacity as chairman of the Investment Committee, and you spoke to the Prime Minister in that letter about the momentum of economic growth, and you said, it's in danger of getting dissipated by delays and roadblocks for no apparent reason. The net result is the country is negatively impacted in investment and industrial growth and the opportunity of being globally competitive. What response did you get from that letter?
I didn't get a response other than an acknowledgement and an agreement that we would meet, which that meeting hasn't taken place as yet. But the Prime Minister agreed to meet the Investment Commission on the issues relating to this letter, and he has undertaken to generate responses on the specific projects that I had listed.
Mr. Tata, you said a very important thing. You wrote to the Prime Minister in May as chairman of the Investment Commission, and you didn't get a response other than an acknowledgement. You got an acceptance or an agreement to meet you, but that meeting hasn't happened either. 4 months have passed, 5 months have passed.
That has been because all of us in the Investment Commission have also been traveling. It is not, I cannot say that that's the issue that lies with the Prime Minister.
It's not that the Prime Minister hasn't responded with alacrity or seriousness.
No.
In that letter, which was widely quoted in the papers, in particular it was quoted on the front page of the Economic Times, you drew specific attention to hold-ups in 2 areas, insurance and banking, and you said that if restrictions were to be removed in these 2 fields, India could see perhaps $2 or $3 billion more of FDI. Now, given that the government is publicly committed to reforms in these areas, when those reforms don't materialize, even after a lapse of 2 or 3 years, what message does it send out to the world?
It doesn't send out a positive message. Sometimes these issues get overblown by foreign investors, but by and large, if India is to open up its economy, it will need funds from outside. It will need external funds. It will need financial inputs. India needs to be a more open financial economy. Therefore, financial services, banking, insurance need to be opened up. There can be constraints on market share. There can be constraints on that one puts so that our financial services don't get dominated by foreign companies, but nevertheless, I think it should be opened up.
So when it's not opened up, despite the fact that the finance minister and the prime minister have committed themselves to doing so and committed themselves repeatedly over a period of 2-3 years, then don't investors both in India and abroad begin to doubt the word of the government? Don't they get worried about its commitment to reform?
Well, I've had a view which I've expressed before and it's made me very unpopular. But usually it's not government policy that leads to this kind of roadblock. It's vested interest in the country, sometimes from the private sector, sometimes from the public sector, that works its way behind the scene into policy which blocks moving forward.
You're saying that vested interests in the form of industrialists who think they might suffer actually work behind the scenes to impede some of the reforms the government is committed to, and as a result, those reforms don't happen.
I say vested interest because it's not industrialists only. It may be individuals, it may be people who are impacted, it may be certain elements of the political environment, it may be the public sector, but vested interests who have a vested interest in seeing something does not happen.
But then what sort of government is it that makes a public commitment for reform and allows backstairs vested interests to hold its hand and restrain its action?
Oh, I think in fairness to our government, that kind of thing happens in varying degrees all over the world, in all governments.
Does it happen more in India than elsewhere? Or does it happen more frequently in India?
Perhaps it does happen more frequently in India because India is in the process of transitioning and it has to open up.
If the next few weeks or months turn out, in fact, to be the last lap of the Manmohan Singh government, how would Indian industry regard the 3 years of UPA rule and in particular the UPA's handling of the economy?
Well, my view on this government, and as I said, I have no political leaning, is that we have had a prime minister who really has, in many ways, made this country proud. He's an upright person of high ethical values, and I believe he has been respected all over the world for what he stands for. At the same time, a government that is a government of coalition, a government of different constituencies with perhaps different ideological approaches, is greatly hindered. And I think this government has, in fact, not been able to perform as it could have performed or as it should have performed. But that is a structure of the makeup of this government.
2 quick questions.
Yeah.
Has this government talked more about reform as a result than it's delivered on reform?
To some extent, that would be true. It has been very vocal on reform. I think the Prime Minister has seriously and genuinely wanted to see the reform take place. I think the political system has not allowed the delivery of that reform to take place.
Secondly, given the track record when it was in office between 1998 and 2004, how would you regard the possibility of another BJP-led government coming to power were there to be midterm elections?
I wouldn't be able to comment on that. As I said earlier, many of these reforms and much of the economic the start of this economic boom happened towards the end of the BJP government.
So you have no reason to fear a BJP government. You'd hope they'd carry on the way they were.
Yes, as a matter of fact, it's a bit disappointing that in many things that they started, like even the thawing of the Indo-American relations, that the BJP is on the other side of the fence today, whereas so many things that we are talking today that we give credit for to the Congress actually started in the BJP government. And so it's a continuation and acceleration of a new move that started to open up the country.
Mr. Tata, let's take a break there. In part two, I want to talk to you in the limited time available about what sort of government will permit India and Indian politicians as well as industrialists to be bold. That's in a moment after the break. Welcome back to Devil's Advocate and an interview with the doyen of Indian industry, the chairman of Tata Sons, Ratan Tata. Mr. Tata, in the middle of one of your answers in part one, you spoke about how the pressures and compulsions of coalition politics impose caution on a government and restrain them. And even a prime minister like Dr. Manmohan Singh with a bold vision is unable to act boldly. Were India to have to go through midterm elections, would you therefore hope that we are returned with a single-party government?
If I leave midterm elections as an issue aside, I really do wish we could go back to the days when we had stronger coalitions or single parties in government or a two-party system in the House, where, in fact, you really dealt with issues and you dealt with serious ideology rather than issues of opposition for the sake of opposing.
And that sort of boldness can only come if you have a strong government, and a strong government has to be a single-party government, preferably, or at least a very strong coalition, not the sort of coalitions we are seeing at the moment.
Well, it has to be a strong majority.
A strong majority confident of itself, and therefore a prime minister who has the confidence of that majority.
A strong government, a strong majority, confident of itself, committed to what it is doing, and having one voice.
So to come back to the thought of boldness which you emphasized so much in part one, am I right in believing that boldness, if it's going to implement itself and work through in policy and vision, has to come from the man at the top? When the prime minister is bold, the country can be bold. When a prime minister is forced to be cautious and hesitant, everyone else becomes cautious and hesitant as well.
Karan, I think you're putting too much load on the prime minister. When the country has to be bold, yes, the government has to be bold, and yes, the prime minister needs to lead the country in that way. But each of us also has to be bold in the businesses we run, in the investment decisions we make, in the marketing moves we do. We have to be bold. We have to try to stretch the envelope. We have to try to be the leaders, not in the country alone, but on a global basis.
So boldness has to come from within each of us.
Absolutely. And it would be wrong just to focus on the government. Boldness has to be the thing that embodies the way we do our business.
That's the message for the future. Be bold.
Absolutely.
Be bold, be brave, and you will be successful.
In fact, internally, I have coined a phrase in the group of think big, be bold, lead and never follow.
Mr. Tata, let's take a break at that point. Let's end this particular first interview there. Tomorrow, I want to talk to you about the left, which you understand so well, and in particular about Tata Industries, which is the industry that you've run for the last 2 decades.
Okay.
That's tomorrow on CNBC at 10:30 p.m. But for tonight, goodbye, good night.